This is The Meaningful Way. I'm your host, Luke Iorio. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast, and I mean that in a whole bunch of ways today. You see, I'm doing something a little different, so as opposed to bringing you the meaningful moment this week, we're going to rebroadcast one of our previous and more popular episodes on the subject of happiness. The guest that I'm going to bring you today is one of the speakers at the upcoming World Happiness Summit in Miami, March 17th to 19th, which I would love for you to check out. Go to happinesssummit.world to be able to check out that event. I'm also honored to be one of the speakers that is going to be appearing there. So I wanted to rebroadcast this particular interview because we approach the subject of happiness and positive psychology and the role that it plays within our lives and the directions that it can take us in a very different way. And so Michelle Gielan is a national CBS News anchor turned positive psychology researcher. We talk about that in the interview, is how do you make that switch? She is also the best-selling author of Broadcasting Happiness. Gives you an idea where we might go in this interview. So Michelle is the founder of the Institute for Applied Positive Research and is also partnered with Arianna Huffington to show how transformative stories fuel success. She's an executive producer of the Happiness Advantage special on PBS and a featured professor in Oprah's Happiness course. Michelle holds a Master's of Applied Positive Psychology degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and her research and advice have received attention from the New York Times, Washington Post, Forbes, CNN, Fox, and Harvard Business Review. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I have. And so, Michelle, we are absolutely delighted that you could stop by and broadcast some happiness across our airwaves.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Thank you. So let's just jump right in, because what I really wanted to go straight into for, maybe with Broadcasting Happiness being your book title, is that we should probably start by what do you mean by broadcasting first? So if you could begin there.
Sure. So originally I was a national anchor at CBS News, and I was hosting two programs there. And I got tired of broadcasting negative news stories. But more importantly, what I wanted to understand was, how can we talk about negative events? It's not just on the news, but in our own lives, around the dinner table, with our business teams, in a way that actually inspires people, empowers them, and helps everyone see a path forward. So I left CBS News. My friends thought I was completely crazy. I'd worked so hard for that job. And I went to study positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. While there, I had this epiphany about all of us, which is that we're all broadcasters. I mean, think about it. As parents, as nurses, as teachers, as leaders, as friends, we're constantly transmitting information to the people around us. And the choices that we make not only, create our own success and happiness, but what we're seeing now in the research convincingly is that it significantly influences every single business and educational outcome that we know how to track, from our intelligence to our productivity, profitability of businesses. Happiness is fuel for us and the people around us.
Well, I think the aha there, the insight in which we truly are all transmitters. We are all broadcasters of whatever the energy, the emotion, the story, whatever it is that we have going on, we transmit that and we influence other people with that, I think is a very powerful one. And I think it's one that we explore, here on this show, is helping people understand the influence that we not only have on ourselves, but on our others, and what the ripple effect of that is. What I'm curious about, though, before we kind of go into exactly how to kind of wield that influence, is tell me about that decision of leaving CBS, leaving the career that you'd worked so hard for, that you felt good about, I've got to walk away from this, and here's what I want to do. How did you make that choice? What was going on at that time?
Well, it was definitely a hard decision. I knew what an incredible opportunity I had there, and how each morning we'd broadcast to millions of people. So that definitely made it tough. But what I think is that I was pulled by this better vision of the future. We have now since done research. I did this with Sean Acor, who's my husband and research partner, and also with Arianna Huffington. We found in our first study that just 3 minutes of negative news in the morning can lead to a 27% higher likelihood of you having a bad day, as reported 6 to 8 hours later. So that means instead of taking a vitamin in the morning, by filling our head with negative news, it actually significantly impacts the trajectory of our day. So we're feeling the effects while we're cooking dinner all the way in the evening. And so now the thing is, though, that with that, we ended up finding out in our second study that you actually can talk about negative events in a more productive and solutions-focused way that fuels empowerment. By just presenting not just the problem, but also talking about solutions in the same moment, that actually significantly increases people's creative problem-solving abilities. Specifically, it improves other people's creative problem-solving by 20%. It also makes them feel better. So just by, as a manager, for instance, or a doctor coming in to talk to a patient in the face of a bad diagnosis, if you're talking about the things that we can do, that has a huge influence on other people, and then also, hopefully, at the same time, fuels those outcomes that you're hoping for.
That is an absolutely staggering stat that you were sharing before, that just that 3 minutes of negative news gives us a 27% more likelihood of having a negative day, having negative experiences throughout our day. And I think it also speaks to how important it is, and I'm going to be curious about this a little bit later on, of how important that is that we literally get that right start. How do we prime ourselves for the experience, the performance of the situations, and how we want to encounter them throughout the course of our day? So just before we get there, and obviously this is part of that motivation for writing Broadcasting Happiness, but if you could talk just a little bit more about the motivation behind choosing to write the book, and what were really some of the objectives? What was it that you really wanted to make sure came across through Broadcasting Happiness?
Well, my hope for the world of media is that we all collectively make this great shift to telling stories in a different way. But I think as individuals and organizations, we don't need to wait. We can apply the same science that would work for media in our own lives to transmit the stories that we face, the challenges that we're experiencing, the good things that are happening in a way that it positively influences our own thinking and that of other people. Mm-hmm. So what I did with, in the book, for instance, is I broke down the science that shows how a positive brain fuels performance, and how when we broadcast that positive mindset, it significantly increases performance for all of us, and shared 7 actionable strategies. These are small communication habits that we can develop, or if we have them already, we can just use them more often. And then how that can increase productive energy by 31%, or decrease the negative effects of stress like 23%. I mean, these are all studies that we either have done ourselves or have been done by my research colleagues in positive psychology.
So let's actually switch gears to some of that, because I wanted to hear a little bit more about this idea of telling stories in a different way. I know, inside of your book and some of your talks, you very appropriately and effectively tie mindset to communication, and how we start to make that shift from more of the negative view of what it is that we're about to share to the positive view of what it is that we're about to share. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is the difference when you say, the negative way versus the positive way of sharing what it is that you have to share. What does that difference look like? And then how do we make that shift?
In any given moment, there are a multitude of facts that we could focus our brain on, and then we could choose to share with other people. And those facts together synthesize, a range of different kinds of stories. I first saw this when I was covering a funeral of a little girl who was killed by a stray bullet from gang gunfire. The night that this happened, we did that negative, sensational story, girl snatched before her time, heart-wrenching interview with the mom and the little kids who watched their friend die. It was awful, right? And it left the viewers, I would imagine, because this is how I felt, paralyzed at home, feeling, oh my gosh, this could happen in my own living room. Versus when I'm at this funeral, I see this beautiful, loving community surrounding this mother and supporting her through a time of great challenge. Mm-hmm. I see that this is in the midst of a neighborhood that's getting better by the stats every single day, thanks to efforts from the police leaders and citizens. How there's not just pain and tragedy, there's hope and optimism and resilience. Mm-hmm. And if we broadcast that story, it's equally true, and it doesn't ignore the negative, but it just takes a different angle on it, and one that leaves us ready to take action. There are 2 types of stories, one that paralyzes us and ones that leave us energized. As we move throughout our day, we can choose to focus on facts that stop our brain in its tracks, leave us feeling stuck, and share those stories with other people. Or we can say, in the same moment, I've got these resources, these wins, these connections, all of these things that I can leverage to move forward and be successful. There's a formula that I think now, seeing all of this research, is the key. It's constantly refocusing our brain on two things: successes and solutions. You want to see what's working and what's to come. So your brain is always has the fuel that it needs to move forward.
I'd like you to go a little bit further, especially on that point around solutions, because I know, having gotten into this conversation numerous times, that some can consider some of the positive thinking to be a bit Pollyanna, right? Only looking at the good side of things, ignoring, right? But what you just said, and which is why I want you to expand on, I think is so crucial as to why that's not the case, and it has to do with the focus on solutions. So could you explain a little bit more about what does that really mean? What does that really look like?
Absolutely. So what we've done in our work is we've identified the three greatest predictors of long-term levels of success. We primarily did this in the work domain, but this absolutely applies to your home life, to your relationships, et cetera. And what we found is it's three dimensions. Your levels of optimism, so the belief that your behavior matters, especially in the face of challenge, and do you expect good things to happen? It's your, what we call positive engagement. Positive engagement is basically your story about stress. Does your brain go and look at a stressful event as a threat or a challenge? And then the last one is support provision. How much support do you provide to the people around you? If your colleague, for instance, at work is falling behind on their duties, are you likely to step in and be there for them? When you, as an individual, score very high on these three dimensions, that's also incredibly predictive of high levels of success at work, both now and in the future. And so what we see is that when our brain is focused, is believing that good things can happen, focusing on what we can do when challenges strike, that's the kind of thinking that propels us. And so in regards to the Pollyanna thing, because this is something that, when I say, I'm a happiness researcher, yeah, that can go over really well sometimes. But when we start talking about the science and the numbers, we see that optimists and pessimists, if they're rational, they both see reality for what it is. They see what's going on. They see the problems in the market. They see the gun violence down the street. They know what's going on. It's just that the optimist believes that they can do something about it. And that is a completely different approach to a challenge than someone who says, it's not, I'm not going to do anything about it. What's the point?
Excellent. And that is so key, because it does begin with that awareness, that objectivity from the first place of this is what it is. These are kind of the facts that are here. This is the situation that's presenting. It's what you do next. It's what do you do with this? Where do you go from this? How do we fix this? That is really what just branches these kind of perspectives into two very, very different directions. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, because I want to stay a little bit on the story and media side of this before we then come back to maybe some of the individuals as well, because I was absolutely fascinated by the end of your book, and you presented something that you called the Journalist Manifesto. I can honestly tell you that when I read it, if you were in the room, I would have given you a standing ovation. I just absolutely love what you're laying out there, why you're laying it out there, and everything else. And so I wanted everybody here to be able to listen to some of that of, what is this Journalist Manifesto? What was a bit of the motivation behind it? And what is it that you are, almost the call to arms, if we could say it that way, the call to action, perhaps better, that you are proposing for the industry?
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That feedback makes me feel great, because I hope that it resonates with people, because I hope that this is the next wave for media. The Journalist Manifesto is a research-based business case for why transforming media is actually good. So yes, transforming media to tell more solutions-focused stories is good for society, and it's good for business and all that. But really what the aim was of that document was to present, at least in the beginning, a case that shows that it's actually good for the bottom line of news organizations. My thinking is that's just a means to an end, right? But if you show a financial incentive to these news organizations, maybe they'll start to create more positive content, and that in turn will be beneficial for society. And the main piece of this that's so important is, and the reason why it's a good idea financially, is that if you place an ad next to negative content, the people who are reading that news story or watching it on TV, they were actually experienced a 27% drop in the likelihood of purchasing that product as a result of being placed next to that negative content. So if you're an advertiser, of course it makes sense then to want to have your content placed next to not puppies and kitties and water skiing squirrels, but empowering, activating content. So I call this transformative journalism, this new approach. It's engaging, activating, solutions-focused journalism. It engages the viewer or reader to believe that their behavior matters. It activates them, gets them, sources out ideas from the public in the face of challenges, and it's solutions-focused. So it's not just talking about problem. It actually talks about the solution. The thing is, for news consumers, when you just go problem, boom, here's your world, what happens is our brain can start to believe that our behavior doesn't matter. And that's the real sad part about what's happening on the news right now. It's not that it's too negative. Yes, it is too negative, but that's only the start of the problem. Mm-hmm. It's a disempowering, helpless, and hopeless view of the world. And that doesn't help any of us move forward and actually feel as if we can figure out the issues and solve our greatest challenges.
I think what you're showing so clearly, and I absolutely love some of the business case and everything else that is there, the science that so clearly backs this stuff up, is that difference from that negative cycle, that negative spiral that begins with some of that news, whether that be literally broadcast news or our own stories focused on the negative facts of a situation, versus what I think you're highlighting, which is a proven virtuous cycle. And that has not only the business implications to it, but the societal implications to it. And while we are waiting for that sea change, which we can only hope comes sooner than later with transformative journalism, I think the other part, which is so important to what you're putting out there, is each of us taking responsibility for the way we show up within our own worlds, within our own families, how we broadcast at the kitchen table, let alone at the conference table. And that's where I think you kind of tie all of these worlds together and say, at the end of the day, let's start with ourselves. And from there, let's create this bigger movement, this bigger action that can ripple through.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious for us, if we turn then to the individual, as we are at the kitchen table, the family room, the conference table, as it were. I know that this is probably rare for our listeners, but let's just imagine that you occasionally have to work with, maybe even live with somebody who's repeatedly negative. I know this is a stretch, but let's theoretically say it's possible, right? So I'm curious. So for you, because you've done so much on this, and I know it even ties to the PBS special that's coming up, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is called Inspire Happiness. And yeah. Excellent. And so what I know it's central to this of how is it that we can really truly begin to handle these situations, handle kind of that environment with people who have more negative response, who put more of that negative story out. How do we change that situation? How do we change our response to it? Because I know so often we hear that you got to do something yourself because you can't change others. What do we do?
Right. Yes. And so I think that's actually the starting place right there, is exactly what you talked about, which is that there is a societal belief that says you can't change other people. I mean, I want the listeners to think about, how many times has someone said that to you during the course of your lifetime? You can't change other people. And so unfortunately, though, what we're seeing is that belief is not only disempowering, it's actually scientifically false. You can have an incredible impact on the way others think, how they act. It might not, with those very negative cases, happen exactly on your time schedule or exactly the way you want, but we are constantly influencing others. There's a wonderful study done at the University of California, Riverside, where they tested 3 people on their moods, and they did this with many groups of 3s. And then they put them in a room and had them just sit there for 2 minutes without speaking, and then they tested their mood after those 3 minutes. After those 2 minutes. It turned out that the most non-verbally expressive person actually significantly influenced the mood of the 2 other people in the room. So if that person was sitting with their arms crossed or frowning or whatnot, it made those other people feel less positive. Meanwhile, if they were relaxed or smiling, it actually made those other people feel happier. So that's just 2 minutes. Imagine if we are constantly communicating in a way that can fuel a positive mindset in another person, how much of an effect we can have.
I think that's fantastic, is to know that we do have that influence on others. We can begin to lead to that change. And I'm curious, I mean, one thing that you just shared there is that physiology, that how expressive we are with our physiology and what that can necessarily create. I'm curious what might be, another strategy or two, because I know you talk a lot about the way in which we communicate. What might be some of those communication strategies of how we broadcast and how we interact with those that would broadcast more negatively than we do?
Well, what I find really interesting is, a lot of people will say, well, what do we do about that really negative person, for instance, in a meeting, right, that brings everybody else down? And they feel so powerful. So like people often ask me, oh, well, so is that person more powerful, or is a positive person more powerful when they think of winning the battle for culture in that room? The science clearly shows it's not the most negative person who's actually the most powerful. It's actually not the most positive person. It's the person who's most expressive of their mindset that can tip others towards it. So the number one way that I always recommend in using these communication strategies to shift the culture is using something I call the power lead. So it's taken from my days in media. If it bleeds, it leads. We want to take the opposite approach for our own personal broadcast and our top story. The power lead is starting off conversations and any other interaction you have with another person by saying something positive and meaningful. The meaningful part is very important. So if someone asks you, hey, how are you doing? You start off by saying, oh, I'm doing great. I had breakfast with my son this morning. He was being so cute. Right? It's so simple. But by starting off with positivity, what ends up happening is because people are socialized to reciprocate and match mood, you're typically going to get someone to respond in kind. If we start off, like I've been guilty of many times before, saying, oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm so stressed. Oh, the boss is driving me nuts. My computer's off. Like, if you start off with negativity, people have only two possible responses, right? They can either meet you with compassion, which I've actually told my husband is always the correct response, or they can play misery poker where, oh, you think your commute was bad? Let me tell you about mine. So the more that we start off with something positive and meaningful, a power lead, the more we prime the conversation to be positive. And we've seen it in many different domains. Meetings, starting off with gratitudes or praise, talking about something good going on at the company, a dinner table, do your gratitudes with your children. There's so many ideas around this. It's all about taking it and making it your own.
So let me ask you to go then even another step further and apply this to ourselves, meaning how do we power lead ourselves? If our disposition occasionally is, I've had the bad day, I had the bad commute, I dropped my cup of coffee, whatever the case may be, to focus on those things, right? How do we begin to prime ourselves, prepare ourselves so that we're in the disposition, we're in the mindset to power lead others?
One of my favorite habits, and this is something I challenge every single person that I speak to when I go to companies and give presentations, to doing for 21 days. It's something called emailing positivity, where they jump on email first thing in the morning when they get to the office, and without looking at your inbox, you hit compose. And then send a 2-minute positive email to someone in your social support network, friend, family member, colleague. Go back to your high school English teacher if you need to, and praise or thank them for something that they've done or how they've been to you. The reason why this is so important is that after just even 2 or 3 days, your brain starts to say, wow, look how many people care about me. You meaningfully activate your social support network, and your brain perceives all of this social support. Social support's the greatest predictor of long-term levels of happiness we have in the research. If you start your day out that way, I guarantee you it will color the rest of the day in a positive way, and it'll also get your mind looking on the lookout for all the other good things that are happening and people that are doing good things for you, because you got to write that note the next day, and so you're cataloging it. It's an awesome practice.
I love the way in which that begins to condition us, to predispose it to do exactly what you just said, which is to look for those opportunities, because the next day or the day after, you're going to need to send that email based on the commitment you've made, and you start looking for it. And of course, as soon as you start looking for it, you find it. So we've covered so much of this in a couple of different angles of how we broadcast happiness, and we're talking obviously a lot about the broadcasting side of this. But just for a moment, I'd love to hear, how do you define happiness? What's at the core of it?
So I define happiness the same way my husband, Sean Acor, does, which is the joy we feel growing towards our potential. This is a definition that came from the ancient Greeks. It's been around for a long time. We love it, and we think it denotes this beautiful sense of growth through the ups and downs of life. Childbirth, not so pleasurable necessarily, but so deeply meaningful, and you can experience joy through that moment. So I think it fits nicely with the research, and it also just speaks to me personally.
Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. And so I guess then for me, and this will probably just be a lead in or a follow, I guess maybe to the last answer, is that my final question for you to kind of conclude everything that we have covered so far. What do you believe is the secret to living a meaningful life?
Gratitude. I think the path to joy is lined with gratitude. And the more that we can cultivate a sense of gratitude in every moment, no matter what's happening, the more we not only move forward with a different, more empowered, more positive, optimistic mindset, but we can also look back on this story and say, I did my best, and it was a full life because of the gratitude.
And when we take that moment, we develop that gratitude practice, we notice all of the things that are just so extraordinary in our lives. It is feeling full. It is feeling like we fully experienced life, we fully appreciated life. And I love even the practice you shared before, which is the way in which we can show that appreciation to others and the ripple effect that it then has. Michelle, I want to thank you so much for coming on The Meaningful Way, coming on this broadcast, and broadcasting both your happiness as well as some of your wisdom and research with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been great being here with you.
Thank you. And for everybody out there listening, I can leave you with nothing better than to take a look at that happiness, the joy we feel while growing towards our potential. And until next time, enjoy the journey. Thanks for tuning in to The Meaningful Way. If you enjoyed this episode, do me a favor and please subscribe and follow along with all these great guests, their stories and interviews. Also, it helps us a lot if you not only share some of your favorite episodes online, but also provide us feedback. Go into iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever your favorite podcast app happens to be, and rate the show. Provide us some feedback and let us know how it is that we're doing. If you want to learn more about what we're up to, whether it be with the IPEC Coach Training School, the Live, Lead, Play Network, or even just what's evolving with The Meaningful Way, go on and head on over to lukeiorio.com.